Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into the Week 7 edition of my top starts and sits. Hopefully, you guys do know the drill by now that I'm going to give you my top 2 starts and sits at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. And as your weekly reminder, you can factor these starts and sits into your daily lineups if you do daily lineups on Thursdays, Friday, Sundays, and Mondays. And you can also factor this into your prop bets. I do it myself when I bet the overs and unders on players. That being said, starting with the quarterback position, my top start of the week is going to be Jayden Daniels against the Cowboys. Now, I do understand Jayden Daniels is a borderline guy that you probably shouldn't have to debate to start or not. But for me to in order to suggest starting a quarterback or any player on this list, they do have to. I have a rule I set, kind of pull back the curtain. They have to not be started in more than 90% of the rosters on ESPN. I checked this morning. Jayden Daniels is still starting less than 90% of the rosters on ESPN. So we need to get that number up ahead of the weekend, especially with this matchup against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against the quarterback position. When you look at what Jayden Daniels, he only played one full game against the Cowboys last year. I think in that second game, I think they had the playoffs or their division wrapped up. So I think he only played like a handful of snaps in that game. But the one full game that he played against the Cowboys last year, he finished with 275 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. He did throw 2 interceptions, but as we all know, interceptions really don't hurt you in your fantasy leagues unless you do play in a league that does have more negative points for interceptions. And then he also had 74 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. And then when you look at the last 4 games for the Cowboys, 3 different quarterbacks have finished with at least 280 passing yards against them. And what you do love is they've given up 12 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. So that is 3 touchdowns a game that quarterbacks are averaging against the Cowboys in their last 4 outings. My other top start I like Caleb Williams against the Saints. Saints have allowed the 4th most points per game against quarterbacks this season. Now, when you look at their last 4 games for New Orleans, they've allowed all 4 quarterbacks they faced to finish with at least 200 passing yards, and they've also given up 9 passing touchdowns. And I think Caleb, as this season has progressed, as I mentioned earlier with the Bears in preseason, I did think this offense was going to take time to click underneath Ben Johnson, and it seems like it's slowly getting there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he puts together his best performance of the season on Sunday. My top sits of the week, even though he's been on fire as of late, I will suggest sitting Sam Darnold this weekend against the Texans. Texans have allowed the fewest points per game against quarterbacks this season. When you look at the last 4 games that the Texans have played, only 2 quarterbacks finished over 200 passing yards, and what you don't love if you want to play Darnold this weekend is the Texans have only allowed 2 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. So unless Darnold can get you over like 250 yards, he might only get you a touchdown through the air when he faces Houston on Sunday. My other sit, even though he was my quarterback out of the week, but like I did say last night, I think he needs to be on at least more benches going forward, more rosters going forward. But I would be hesitant to play Jackson Dart against the Broncos. The Broncos have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against the quarterback position. Now, the one positive that maybe Dart can take advantage of is there have been 2 quarterbacks that have finished over 275 passing yards against Denver in their last 4 games. But those are more of the upper echelon quarterbacks that have better receiving options than what Dart is throwing to in New York. And what I really don't like about it is kind of the same reason with Darnold. The Broncos have only given up 3 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. So yes, there's a chance he might be able to get you some yards to the air, ideally those yards on the ground that he's been doing. But like I mentioned, they've been very good at keeping opposing quarterbacks from throwing touchdowns against them in their last 4 games. Moving into the running back position, my top starts of the week. My top start, I am going to go with the guy he'll be playing in tomorrow night's game in the Thursday night matchup, Jaylen Warren against the Bengals. The Bengals are allowing the most points per game against the running back position. They over their last 4 games, they have allowed at least three different running backs to finish with at least 85 total yards against their defense. And then what you like is they've given up 7 running back touchdowns in their their last 4 games. So I do like the chances that Warren's going to get anywhere between 75 to 100 total yards, and ideally a touchdown or two for you to kick off the weekend, so you have a strong start heading into your Sunday matchups. My other top start I do like the pair of running backs. Obviously, Ramondre Stevenson's getting the fair share of touches, but I do like the chances that we're finally going to get a Travion Henderson blow-up spot against the Titans this weekend. I do definitely love Travion Henderson in my daily lineups just because he'll probably be a cheaper option in your daily lineups compared to Stevenson. And then when you look at this matchup, the Titans are tied for the second most allowed points per game against the running back position. In their last 4 games, they have actually allowed 4 different running backs to finish with at least 80 rushing yards, and they've also given up 8 running back touchdowns. So again, I think Stevenson probably ends up still getting most of the touches, but I wouldn't be surprised if Henderson puts together his best performance, not only on the ground but through the air. And I like the chances that both of them find their way in the end zone this weekend. Then moving into my sits, my top sit of the week, I am going to go with Michael Carter against the Packers. The Packers have allowed the second fewest points per game against the running back position. One reason outside of the stats for Green Bay that I don't like Carter is Bam Knight, the other running back for Arizona, was cutting into his touches this past weekend. There was that report that he was actually going to be the starter over Carter. That didn't become true. Carter did end up taking most of the snaps, but when the Cardinals got close to the end zone, it was Bam Knight that got the end zone touches and got the running touchdown for the Cardinals against the Colts last weekend. So that factoring in that Bam Knight's going to have a role in this offense along with Carter is why I don't necessarily want Carter in my lineups this weekend. And then when you look at the matchup against the Packers, they have allowed only just 2 running backs that cross 50 rushing yards against the Packers in their last 4 games, which does hinder Carter, the fact that he's going to be splitting those running touches against the Packers. And then why I really don't like him is that they've only allowed 2 running back touchdowns in their last 4 outings as well. Moving into my other top sit, and this is a guy that's putting together a very strong season for the Jaguars, but I don't like Travis Etienne Jr. against the Rams in that game that's going to kick off Sunday in London. This game against the Rams, they have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against the running back position this season. In their last 4 games, only 2 running backs finished over 50 rushing yards against their defense. And then I really don't like is the same reason as Carter is they've been very good at keeping running backs out of the end zone. They've only allowed 1 running back touchdown in their last 4 games. So unless Etienne can get you, 80 to 100 yards, total yards, I don't like his chances of finding the end zone, which is why it's more likely he's going to get a floor play in London than a ceiling play. Moving into my top starts and sits at the wide receiver position. My top start of the week is Ladd McConkey against the Colts. Yeah, you could definitely consider playing Keenan Allen. You could definitely consider playing Quentin Johnston if he's back in the lineup, if he is healthy. I know he missed this past game. But the reason why I like Ladd McConkey is, A, the Colts are dealing with injuries at their cornerback position. They're likely going to be without Charvarius Ward, their best cornerback on the roster. But that doesn't really affect McConkey, even if Ward does end up some passing concussion protocol and playing, because Ward's going to play out on the boundary. He would cover a Johnston or whoever lines up out there. As we know, McConkey can play out in the boundary and inside the slot, which brings me to the Colts, the best nickel cornerback in the NFL. Kenny Moore has been out for some time with an Achilles injury. Now, he did return to practice today. I still think he's probably going to miss at least one more game. I don't think they're going to want to rush him back, especially considering they're sitting at a 5-1 record. If they have to drop this game because they didn't play more, but they got more for the rest of the season, instead of rushing him back and maybe doing something drastic to that Achilles, makes me think that Kenny Moore won't be playing in this. So if Kenny Moore's out of this lineup, then McConkey can eat against the backup nickel cornerback for Indianapolis. And then when you look at this matchup for McConkey, he's going against a Colts defense who have allowed the 6th most points per game against the wide receiver position this season. Over their last 4 games, 3 different wide receivers have finished with at least 75 receiving yards against them, and they've also given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. My other start of the week, of course, I don't have to tell you to start Justin Jefferson, but I do like his counterpart, Jordan Addison, against the Eagles. Now, the Eagles are in the middle of the pack. They've allowed the 17th most points per game against the wide receiver position, which is you think, oh, it's not like the top 10 like you normally do, Cody. Well, if you actually look at their last 4 games, they've been giving up some receiving yards. They've actually allowed 4 different wide receivers in their last 4 games to finish with 80 receiving yards. Now, they haven't been giving up the wide receiver touchdowns. Just 3 wide receiver touchdowns have been given up in the last 4 games. But you would think that their main focus would be taking away Justin Jefferson, which is going to leave a lot of one-on-one opportunities for Jordan Addison. Now, we'll have to see if Quinyon Mitchell, their best cornerback, is going to play this weekend. Obviously, if he doesn't play, that bodes well already for Addison. But even if he does play, Mitchell's going to be lined up in coverage on Justin Jefferson often, so that's going to leave him for Addison. Those one-on-one opportunities, I'm looking for Kevin O'Connell to set him up to have a successful day against Philadelphia. My other sits, they're definitely tied to my top sits of the quarterback position, but I don't like Jackson Dart's top receiving option this weekend, Wan'Dale Robinson against the Broncos. Broncos have I've allowed the second fewest points per game against the wide receiver position. Now, they have allowed 2 different wide receivers to finish over 85 receiving yards in their last 4 games, but they've only allowed 1 wide receiver touchdown in the last 4 games. So yeah, he's just playing a tough defense. Now, I don't know if Robinson's a guy they're going to put Patrick Surtain on one-on-one coverage like they did with Garrett Wilson last week when they shut him down. But you never know. Maybe they do want to take Robinson out of this matchup, and if he ends up seeing Patrick Surtain on one-on-one coverage often this game, it's not going to bode well for Robinson to perform well this weekend. My other sit is going to be Cooper Kupp against the Texans. The Texans have allowed the 4th fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. In their last 4 games, the most receiving yards one wide receiver got is 72 receiving yards. If there's going to be a wide receiver for Seattle that gets at least 72 receiving yards this weekend, you know it's going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba. And then, so that fact that you factor in that they've been very good at keeping a low yardage total against wide receivers in their last 4 games. They've also been very good at keeping wide receivers out of the end zone. They've only allowed 2 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. Moving into my top starts and sits at the tight end position, my top start of the week, this is going to be a big, a high risk, high reward streaming option with the rookie tight end for the Jets, Mason Taylor against the Panthers. Now, I am factoring in that Garrett Wilson is supposed to miss this game. So the fact that their top passing option is going to be out of the lineup, that can actually funnel more targets to Mason Taylor. And then when you look at Taylor's matchup, he draws a very good matchup against a Panthers defense who have allowed the 2nd most points per game against the tight end position. In their last 4 games, 3 different tight ends finished with at least 35 receiving yards. So if you play a half point, full point PPR leagues, that's going to get you at least 5+ points. And as I always say, sometimes out of your tight end, just get me 5 points for the week. And then what I also like about him is they've given up 3 tight end touchdowns. So they've been giving up yards, they've been giving up touchdowns over the last 4 games to the tight end position, which is why I think Taylor's a sneaky streaming option this week. My other guy is a guy I suggested last night as my tight end ad of the week, Harold Fannin Jr. against the Dolphins. The Dolphins, why I like him is we'll have to see if David Njoku is able to play with his knee injury. If he ends up getting ruled out, that makes me love Fannin Jr. even more this weekend. But then he does have a great matchup going against a Dolphins defense who have allowed the 5th most points per game against the tight end position. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 3 different tight ends to finish with at least 65 receiving yards, which bodes well for Fannin Jr. And then they've also given up 3 tight end touchdowns in their last 4 games. So they've been giving up a ton of yards plus the touchdowns, which is why Fannin Jr. is a great option this weekend. Now, my top sits, I don't put pairs of tight ends on my list. It's just because we don't know exactly if George Kittle is going to play this weekend. But I have George Kittle and Jake Tonges, and Tonges has done a very solid job filling in for Kittle since he's been out. But Kittle did return to practice today, But the biggest thing you got to keep in mind, he was limited in practice. He's coming back from a hamstring injury. If anybody has been following along with me over the last several years that I've been doing these videos, you do know if a player's missed several games, I'm not the biggest fan of playing a player in his first game back to action, especially when it's a hamstring injury. All it takes is him sprinting a little too hard on a route and he re-injures that injury. And then the fact that he was limited in practice does make me wonder, is even if he does play this weekend, is he going to be playing a limited amount of snaps? Now, if George Kittle is ruled out and you maybe want to turn to Jake Tonjes as a streaming option, I would be hesitant to do that. So the reason why is he's going against a Falcons defense who have allowed the second fewest points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at the last 4 games for the Falcons, not one tight end finished over 25 receiving yards against them, and they've only allowed 1 tight end touchdown. So unless if you play Kittle or you end up playing Tonjes, unless they find the end zone, they might not get a lot of yards for you this weekend, which is why I would look for a different option on Sunday. My other top sit, I am going to go with TJ Hawkinson against the Eagles. The reason why is just when you look at what they've done against the tight end position in their last 4 games. First of all, for the entire season, they have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against tight ends. Now, in their last 4 games, not one tight end finished over 35 receiving yards, and they have only allowed 1 tight end touchdown in that time frame. So yeah, factor in that they've been very good at limiting tight ends from getting yards. Unless Hawkinson is able to find you the end zone, is why I don't like him as well this week. So yeah, that wraps up my top starts and sits for week 7 of this season. As always, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like button. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Continue to get that number up. Let's try to get to close to 150 as we can as we reach the midpoint of the season. With that being said, you can always find me on different social media platforms. I'm on X, that's where I'm mainly active. I'm on Instagram, and I am also on TikTok. The handle is @CodyTalksNFL. And then as always, guys, wish you the best of luck. I'll talk to you next week. Peace out.